Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Steve Doborowski. He's the Senior Principal for Thought Leadership and Advisory Services at Cornerstone. Sherry Van Sloan is the Assistant Director of National Intelligence for Human Capital at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Bruce Geip is the Chief Operating Officer at the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, and Chris Mihm, Managing Director of Strategic Issues at the Government Accountability Office. It's great to have you all on here today. And our topic is workforce planning, workforce strategizing in a time of great change, maybe a little bit to some degree of a time of stress on the workforce. So what I'd like to begin with, first with our federal guests, is to talk about what is your workforce strategy? How are you developing a workforce and what's effective for you in developing the workforce from the perspectives that you all have? And Sherry, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Tom. Happy to be here. This is a great chance to talk about a critical time in our history and our workforce issues that are facing all of us, I think, across the federal sector. For the intelligence community, we talked a while ago, and before COVID even started, we had an initiative going on called the Right Trusted Agile Workforce Initiative. And that was really focusing on thinking about the future workforce, the future of work, and really the future workplace that we're going to actually be able to attract and retain that workforce that we need. So some of those things that we thought we were focusing on and moving forward on, COVID has really taken hold of those and moved them maybe 1,000 times faster than we thought they would. So we're really looking across how do we make this agile workforce who works easily in and out of government and can go into private sector and have opportunities that can make them more agile, make them more, focused on getting cutting edge technology, a world-class workforce that we're looking for. And so this initiative has really allowed us to push forward on the ability to work with private sector in ways that we never have. We have new legislation this year that allows us to put our folks in for-profit companies, as well as those for-profit company folks coming into the IC workforce to learn more about what we do and understand the federal government better. We realize that this partnership with private sector is critical, and so the better we do this and the better we integrate some of those technologies they're focusing on that we need to also focus on and that build those partnerships, the more the better. So we are really looking to leverage that initiative. We're investing in IT platforms and tools in new ways to recruit those kinds of skills we're looking for, but also building up the workforce that we have and giving them that exposure and those experiences to reskill.
It sounds like you have the expectation then that people will be coming in and out of the agency maybe a little bit more freely than was the expectation in decades past.
Absolutely. We know the next generation of workforce that we're targeting does not want to have that 30-year career sitting at one desk working one target. We know they're going to want exposure to new data sets, to new problems, to new challenges. And we want to make that the norm, that these folks will move around and they will move easily, and it's going to be expected and not the unexpected, right? That's going to be the way the workforce is going to work in the future. So we're really looking forward to that more fluid workforce and building those skills along the way, that continuous learner development that we're looking for.
All right, and Chris Mihm, I want to talk to you next because the Government Accountability Office and your job as strategic issues guy, you look at workforce planning in federal agencies, but also the GAO is noted for its own workforce planning and treatment because it does end up on the best places to work in the federal government pretty regularly, high up there on the list. So give us your perspective.
Well, thank you, Tom, and like Sherry and Bruce and Steve, it's a pleasure to be here today, and especially to be with them on this panel. A couple of things that we focus on that I think are particularly important. One is to make sure that each of our employees, and we certainly look for this in other agencies as well, has a clear line of sight between what they're working on a day-to-day basis, even though it could be quite operational or into really the details of a program or project, how they have a clear line of sight between what they're doing and larger public outcomes that are going to be achieved. We really lean into the motivations that people bring into the public service, which is to be involved in something big and important and that makes a difference for their fellow citizens. And so to the extent that we can have those conversations and really show them how they're what they're working on is going to lead to a demonstrable improvement. In our case, it would be a program or regulatory improvement in agency or a substantive financial savings to the federal government. With other agencies, obviously, it's linking up to their missions. That's when you get the greatest employee engagement, and that's when you get the greatest work out of people, is when they're most engaged. And so we find that to be very important. Two other points just to underscore exactly what Sherry was saying, and I think they were just spot on, is one, making sure that we develop partnerships. And that is that in our case, it's not just with the private sector, but it's with other audit organizations at the national level, at international level, state and locals, so that people can feel comfortable in moving in and out, from us to the IGs or back to the IGs or even within the private sector. And then second, and related to that, is making sure that we have that fluid workforce. And that's something I'll admit that we still have to work on a little bit more at GAO, and that is bringing people in at the mid-career and perhaps even later in their careers. We still at times have an orientation of you come in at early and then kind of work your way through for a while. I think we're making tremendous progress on that, but that's still something that we and others need to work on.
Yeah, so the implication there then, Chris, is that the understanding of the mission, the understanding of where the agency fits in the panoply and where its mission fits in the overall delivery of the government is maybe the priority thing to instill in people before the specific training for the specific job that they might have, whatever technical or managerial skills they might need.
Absolutely, Tom. And when we used to do back in ancient history, like before March, when many of us did on-site recruitment fairs at universities, I was struck that how infrequently federal agencies sold the mission. And that's really our competitive advantage. And in our case, we're not going to be at a pay standpoint overly competitive with some of the big top consulting firms in the world that, and I get that. But what we can sell is the mission. And that's, we certainly do that, but you wouldn't, I would be struck that, some other federal agencies wouldn't do that nearly as well as I thought they could. And I'd almost feel like talking to applicants or people coming to their recruitment table and say, let me tell you a little bit more about what this agency is doing. It's fantastic stuff, and that, because that again is where you're going to get people engaged and where they're going to do their best work for the agency and for themselves.
Yeah, that's the old proverb, I'm not pushing a broom, I'm helping put a man on the moon, so to speak.
Absolutely, and that's a very, very powerful story, and from everyone I've heard, it's a true one. And so that's exactly it.
All right, and Bruce Geip from Office of Special Counsel, very tiny agency, but one with a very important mission and a very big impact on the rest of the federal workforce. So you've been all teleworking too during all of this, and what are some of the workforce development strategies that you pursue, given the very specialized nature and specialized knowledge set that the people making the decisions there need to have?
Right. So, I would start out, I'm really happy to start out talking about mission, because I'd say I've had a 25-year career in the federal government, but never have I been in a place like OSC where I really think that's the driving force behind everyone. And when we do a good job, it just isn't that our office does a good job, but, planes are safer to fly in because we're calling out whistleblowers or helping us make planes safer to fly in. A veterans hospital, people are less likely to die because of changes we make. And literally the federal government gets back hundreds of millions of dollars for every dollar spent at OSC. So we have a really, really good and important mission, and I think that drives our people. As far as workforce planning, I'd say I kind of look at it as 3 tiers: long-term, medium-term, and short-term. Long-term, we do a strategic plan like everyone does. So our last strategic plan was in 2017. And so we literally looked there and said, okay, where do we need to put more resources? And one of the examples was in our IT, we were moving to an electronic case management system, getting our complaints online, moving our infrastructure to the cloud. So we put it right in the strategic plan that we wanted more people. We put an actual number on it in our IT department. Then in the medium range, the yearly budget process right now, we're in the process of looking at 2022, getting that ready for OMB and for Congress. And when we do that, this year we've reached out to all of our program units, asked them to tell us not just how many employees they need, the kind of training they need, travel. So we really can make an informed argument about what we need. And then in the short term, and that's where being a tiny agency, we have about 130 FTE comes into play. We just have to be very agile, and if we get more than we expect or less than we expect, then we have to get creative and come up with good solutions to spend that money in a good way. And we're an agency that's almost completely FTE. I mean, our budget goes almost completely FTE. So we have to get creative, move people around, do details, work with outside partners. So we get very creative and very agile once we get into the year we're actually talking about.
Okay, interesting. And Steve, let's talk about your perspective and seeing across government from your perch, and also having the knowledge coming in corporately on some of the commercial best practices in recruiting and workforce planning. What do you see as the big issues?
Sure. First off, thank you for the invitation and the ability to, or the opportunity to speak with everyone on the session today. I really appreciate it. As Cornerstone is a talent management company, this is something that's really critical to our day-to-day operations, and it's vital to our core. My history with the work in the federal government involved a stint at Treasury Department and head of learning and leadership development at IRS as well. So I have that flavor as well. What we see across the board is there's a couple components that are critical to talent management when we talk about it. And an organization, in terms of planning for the future, and what this situation that we're in today has really taught us the importance of agility and adaptability and changing some of those things. So change certainly is going to be one of those things that we want to probably incorporate into our conversation today. But there are three characteristics that we thought that were really important to an effective talent management or workforce planning strategy. It really starts with defining your organizational needs. So define your organizational needs, develop your talent, and evolve your workforce and your leaders for the future. And those are the three components that we believe are important to really effective management of workforce planning. It's becoming critical. What's clear in the private sector versus the public sector is a lot of times what we're spending time doing in the public sector is looking at historical performance as opposed to predicting and moving forward. What this environment has taught us is that we need to get a little bit more looking out the front windshield as opposed to the rear view mirror in terms of talent management and workforce planning. So when we talk about defining, we really need to get to starting with skills of the individuals. What does the organization need in order to accomplish its mission? How are we positioning our people for doing that? And how are we developing them at all levels of the organizations? Some of the things that I'm really excited to hear Sherry and Chris and Bruce talk about are how we're leveraging the powers of leaders at all levels across the organization, and how are we incorporating them into the overall mission accomplishment and incorporating their workforce needs moving forward. Also, one of the other things that I think is critical that we see across government organizations is this desperate need to identify those high performers, right? So we talk about it a lot. I don't know that we do a great job of identifying them deliberately, but I think there's some efforts to do it. I think there are ways that we're going to talk about today that you can get to that workforce planning and incorporating high potential opportunities, stretch assignments, those types of things. I mean, there are a lot of opportunities that we're going to talk about. And then finally, as I started to say, one of the things that this has taught us about is it's no longer enough to just think about what we've done in this performance year or how we've performed thus far. What's really critical is what are we going to need moving forward? And that goes, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and start to be able to predict and foresee some of those skills and those capabilities that we're going to need to bring into our workforce, whether it's through our training and development initiatives or it's through our recruiting and attracting that talent. So a number of different factors, but I think that kind of lays out our philosophy on talent management, workforce planning.
And I know, Chris, that the GAO has looked at these types of topics repeatedly. And how would you characterize, the status of the government? Is it generally good at that kind of look ahead and planning type of issues, or is there a little bit of room to grow there?
Well, I think there's always room to grow. I think it's perhaps not surprising across federal agencies. We see it's better in the short and in the intermediate term, less good in really the long term. And that is, one of the key things, and we've looked internationally at the kind of best practices in workforce planning as well, is that the very best organizations are thinking 5 and 10 and even 15 years out, very often using scenario planning as to what is the future? What are our futures? What could we look like in 10 and 15 years? What are the skills that we're going to need to be successful across those futures? And then let's start recruiting and hiring and training off of those today. And so it's really having as Steve was saying, a genuine future-oriented and looking out of the front mirror or the front windshield rather than the rear view mirror. The other point to underscore that Steve was saying is, and I know Sherry and Bruce would agree with this as well, is really integrating workforce planning systematically into the organizational planning and the results that you're trying to achieve for your organization, and not having them be stovepiped or standalone efforts. I mean, I think in the early years of the GPRA modernization, where there were requirements put in place for HR plans to be part of the performance plans that agencies were doing, it was pretty evident what was happening, which is that someone in the 11th hour was saying, where's the HR plan? Call HR, get the plan. And it would end up usually being Appendix 2 or Appendix 3, even having a different font and different graphics and all that sort of stuff. Both visually and substantively, it was clear that there wasn't that integration going on. And so we need to be thinking about what does the future look like, and asking that question in the context of what is the mission and how we're going to achieve that mission. Let's start hiring, recruiting, and working out off of that today to make sure we have the leaders and the staff in the future that are going to help us be successful.
And I want to follow up on those points with our other guests, but this is a good place to take a break. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This discussion is Overcoming Workforce Disruption Through Strategic Planning, sponsored by Cornerstone here on Federal News Network.